谢谢大家回谢北北时间，我是大叔上，
我是大叔甲。
我们今天很高兴又邀请到 Chris Tomlinson， 我的这个大学很要好的朋友。那他也反正就是一个很厉害的人。他上次是用一个战地记者的角度，他以前当过战地记者，然后他最近这几年呢，没有在战场上，可是他是《纽约时报》的这个 bestsellers， 他写了好几本书然后我们今天特别邀请他来讨论这个他的第一本 bestseller 叫做 Tomlinson Hill: The Remarkable History of Two Families Who Share the Tomlinson Name, One White, One Black。喘口气那当然我们等一下听他讲他自己的家族的故事不过这个我真的非常期待听他讲这些事情。那大叔甲你觉得呢？
我觉得我们今天透过一个个人的故事，请 Chris 来跟我们聊一聊，让我们用另外一种比较 personal 的感觉去理解一下，为什么美国这个大家会觉得说，美国这个黑白的问题、种族问题这么难处理那今天我们只是看一个家庭的角度这样子，我觉得这是非常对我来讲是非常有价值的事情，因为有时候历史就是大家写大历史，但是有时候真正的历史就是我们身边的事情，就是这样子，也没有什么太复杂的，大家也别把它弄得好像很伟大，但是话又说回来，就是我们身边的事情就是真正发生的事情。
是，好，那我们现在进入节目。Hey everybody, we are so lucky to have Chris join our show. He's an old friend of mine, but more importantly, he has stories. Chris, would you please say hi to everybody?
Hey everybody.
Great. So what about racism, which is a heavy topic, but that's all you do. So Uncle Jia, would you care to start a conversation?
Sure. Hi Chris, welcome to the show. Well, maybe we have Chris to share with us his sort of personal story first. We understand that, Chris, you have some personal history and story that you can kick us off with.
Sure. When I was a little boy, my grandfather used to say to me that our family owned slaves, and that I should be proud of that. And I should also know that our former slaves loved us so much, they took Tomlinson as their last name. And he was proud of that. He thought I should be proud of that. And it was just part of our family history.
Did you take that as a given? I mean, how did you feel when you first heard that?
Well, you're 5, 6 years old.
Sure.
You take it as a given. You want to feel, right. Every little kid wants to feel special.
Absolutely.
Every little kid wants to feel like part of some sort of secret royalty or aristocracy.
Of course.
And that's what he was giving me.
And when you went to school, what happened?
Well, when I first started, I am old enough that in 1971, the schools in Dallas, Texas were still segregated.
Oh, really?
I went to an all-white school.
Wow.
And so everybody had similar stories. Everybody was saying, we're super special. It wasn't until the 4th grade that they desegregated the schools. And then I went from an all-white school to a school that was a little more Black than it was white.
Wait, you say a little bit more Black, meaning like more than 50%?
More than 50%.
I see. Got
it. They put us on buses, and they would bus the white kids halfway across the city and bus the Black kids halfway across the city and stick us in the same space. And also, frankly, a lot of white families in Dallas then knew what was coming. And so they moved to the suburbs. They moved to the lily white suburbs, right, where they could send their kids to lily white schools and not have to mix with the Black people.
Yeah. No, actually, this reminded me. So I finished up my high school in Alabama, and it was Central High, and it's very much, so like that's the only school, and everybody has to go. But it's interesting in that, I mean, obviously, I just arrived in the U.S., so I didn't have all the context, and then it was very interesting to immediately see, even if they're physically in the same space, they're still in two different worlds. And for me, as quote unquote a foreigner, I can like go back and forth because I don't really belong to either group.
That's right.
Well, and since you and I went to college together, Uncle San, we're not that far off in age. So, you were probably one of the few Asian kids in your high school in Alabama.
Yes, actually, there are three. There are a total of three, and we move in different circles. so
wow.
Yeah. Well, I mean, sort of going into your story, and as we mentioned earlier, Chris wrote a New York Times bestseller book on this topic, and sort of from the outside, or not necessarily outside, I mean, if you study history, you live in the US, racism is bad, right? Nobody would say otherwise. But how did you come about writing the book and sort of this personal journey? So what's the genesis, as it were?
Well, it really started in fourth grade. I'm sitting in the classroom, and the teachers are struggling to try to get the Black kids and the white kids to get along and talk to each other. And so we learned Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. And one of the lines is that he dreams of a day when on the red hills of Georgia, that the sons of slaves and the sons of slaveholders can come together in brotherhood. And that was the moment I thought, I want to go meet a Black Tomlinson. I want to go find the kid, the kid like me with whom I share this common story. Now, of course, that was fourth grade, and I was 44 years old before I started working on the book. So it took a while. But I also discovered that my contemporary on the Black side of the family was one of the most famous football players in the National Football League, a running back named LaDainian Tomlinson. And that just as I was going back to the old slave plantation to investigate the past, his mother was going back to the plantation to try to help the community rise out of poverty. And that's where we met.
Wow. Oh, okay. So you did manage to meet other Tomlins.
Oh, I met 24 other Tomlinsons, and most of them were Black. My side of the white side of the family didn't reproduce that much. I'm the last one on mine. I don't have any children, so I'm the last Tomlinson on my line.
Wow! So you're an endling for your line. That's well, so just sort of the mechanics, as it were. So it sounded like the old plantation is still at least physically around, and then so there's still some records around, or because how did you go back and look for, like, is there a genealogy book?
Well, I mean, there are many. In my case, my family, one of my ancestors collected the letters of the family and published it in a book called The Marlin Compound. And the Marlin is the name of the town next to the plantation. The plantation was called Tomlinson Hill because it was on a hill that overlooked the city of Marlin. And that is still, they still grow cotton on that land. There's still cattle grazing there. It's smaller than it used to be, but it's still a working ranch, a working farm. And then some of my ancestors who had fought in the Civil War built a tabernacle, a gathering place for the old Confederate veterans. And that is still standing. And it's where the Black Tomlinsons hold their family reunion every year.
Really? Wow.
Interesting. There's
a big sign saying, "Welcome old veterans to Tomlinson Hill."
Oh, really? Goodness.
Yeah.
So it's been there for like over
150 years.
150 years. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow.
It's a there's a little state historical marker, and it's a thing. And there's still Black Tomlinsons who live right next to it. You can just walk to their house. And that's what I did. Is I got there and I started knocking on the doors and saying, "I'm looking for Black Tomlinsons," and that's how I found them.
Well, actually, I wonder how was their first reception of you knocking on their door? I mean, what you say you were literally looking for, other Black Tomlins, and how did they react to that? Or did they say, "Oh, hi, brother," or what was the initial encounter like?
Well, they were not surprised. I mean, they had known white Tomlinsons their entire lives. Tomlinsons had lived in Marlin up until the 1990s. So, it was no mystery that I existed, that we had this common history. I think what they were suspicious of was my sincerity to tell the truth.
Right.
And I had to earn their trust because, initially they just told me all the happy stories and said everything was fine. There were never any problems. And I knew that wasn't true. But it literally took me 3 years to earn their trust and to show them that I wanted the real story. And that's when they finally sat down and told me the truth, because, for those families, there was never any benefit to being honest to a white person. If you said what you were really thinking or what you were really feeling, it was only going to end badly for you. And so they got very good at always being friendly and smiley and always saying the right thing, because in our society, they just would suffer if a white person got mad at them.
Right. Well, so a little bit more background, if I may. So, after Civil Wars, slaves were emancipated, and then so just sort of from the so what happened to plantation, and then the white Tomlinson family just kind of move on, or just maybe give us a little bit more background on the context.
Sure. Well, the plantation stayed in the family until 1987.
Goodness. Okay.
And what happened was when the slaves were freed, the Union troops ordered the slaves to stay on the plantation and to continue working for the white people, but the white people had to pay them.
I see.
It was no longer an owner, slave master situation. It was now an employer-employee situation.
Like sharecroppers.
And they became sharecroppers. And my family systematically cheated the Black families of what they deserved for 80 years. My great-grandfather bragged about lynching Black men who got out of line, even from up at my family's house, and then rode off to lynch people, to kill people. And that's how they maintained their social control.
Sure.
Right. And then so that being a context, I think is very helpful to understand why it took. I'm surprised it took only 3 years for this a long historic wound to kind of open up to you. May I ask if you did, in your own estimate, like it just your your heart eventually they see your heart, or like did you do anything, and what was the turning point, as it were?
Well, I think, like any good reporter, and I am fundamentally a reporter, not a historian, I would go gather facts. I would go through the old newspapers. I would go through the old books and the documents at the courthouse, and I would find things that said, oh, my family did something bad, or I found the marriage certificate of the early Black Tomlinsons just after emancipation, right after they became free. They immediately got married, and I found their birth certificate. And so I could take copies of that birth certificate to them, and I would take copies of the newspaper stores and say, hey, I know this bad thing happened, and I really want to know the truth. Will you help me? And when they realized that I really was investigating, I really was digging, then they and I was a reporter for the Associated Press in Austin at the time, so they could see my stories I wrote in the newspaper.
Right. You're legit.
Yeah, and so it I wasn't just another white Tomlinson trying to do a version of Gone with the Wind for my family. Gone for the Wind, of course, being that great film about the Civil War that is deeply, deeply racist.
Yes.
Yeah. So then how do you sort of even personalize the process? I mean, you went through knocking on the door, and then you were able to sort of convince them that you're interested in the truth, and you dug up a lot of facts that are relevant to them and to yourself. And what did you have to do next in your own personal journey? If there's some sort of reconciliation, if I can use that word.
Sure. I mean, I wouldn't use the word reconciliation because, we were strangers. They didn't know me. I'd never done anything to them. They had never done anything to me. I dealt mostly with elderly people who were happy to have someone keep them company and listen to their stories. And, it's at one point I had a film crew because we made a documentary film to go with the movie. And so bring in a film crew to film them, that makes them feel special. And then I have to start writing. I have to start putting the stuff together. And then I take the chapters to them and say, okay, here's the chapter we talked about. Please help me correct the mistakes. And I think just as many of them said, as one thing I kept hearing over and over again is, I have waited my entire life for someone who wants to know the truth. I've waited all my life for a white Tomlinson to treat me with respect and express regret for what happened to my family. And I didn't apologize for myself, but I was very honest about how my white skin gave me all kinds of opportunities that they never had. They never had a chance to go live in Europe. They never had a chance to travel the world. They didn't get a chance to go to college. They went to the worst schools. They were only educated to do one thing, and that was pick cotton. And if they wanted to learn anything else, they were told no. And the white government would not educate them to do anything else. And so for them to realize that their stories mattered, that was important to them.
Well, you know, that's a very, I was going to say that that's a very interesting point, because most people, I sincerely believe most people who walk around in the States now consider themselves not a racist, of course. And so, you know, you were just saying that it seems to me that there is sort of a institutionalized system that was in place to sort of keep the status quo going, so to speak, to, you know, educate people so that they can do field work or pick cottons and whatnot, and not to aspire to higher goals or even other goals. So to that extent, you know, it's kind of interesting and revealing to me anyway, that there's a lot more than sort of personal bias at play here, and it's actually an entire state or even an entire country, so to speak.
Well, I mean, this is what people talk about when they say critical race theory. It's this idea that these institutions and these laws were created by a racist government to segregate people and to oppress people with colored skin. And while we've had the Civil Rights Act of 1968, there are still lots of things baked into this system that we need to get out of it. We need to extract. And critical race theory says that's what we need to do. People think it's a long time ago. You know, one woman I interviewed knew her grandfather who was a slave. I know someone who knew someone who was a slave. That's not that long ago. I was born in 1965. At the time, it would have been illegal for me to marry my wife who was born in India. It was not that long ago, and we still have all these things baked in to our society that we need to fix. And that's why we now talk about it's not enough to not be a racist. You have to be an anti-racist. You have to actively go out and try to fight racism in society. That's what counts. But if you're just coasting along, enjoying the system as it is now, even though it's racist, because it benefits you, you don't care. Well, that's not enough. That's not enough.
Right. Yeah. No, I think again, you know, it's not disconnect, but I think on one hand, rationally, it makes a lot of sense, but just sort of at an intuitive level, sometimes it's having to remind myself all the time, and sort of, you know, being ethnic Chinese, you know, education attainment is a big thing. And then, so sometimes when I talk to somebody who is quote unquote undereducated, I just have this visual reaction. It's like, why are we having this conversation? But then sometimes, not always, sometimes people are just rude, but other times it's like, you know, they have a very different background. You know, the fact that, you know, they even finished high school is, frankly, if I were in their shoes, I don't think I could make it, that kind of thing. But in any case, I do, you know, before we kind of talk about the larger picture, Chris, I do want you to kind of share with us. I mean, obviously you work with the older generation of the Black Tomlinson. So can you talk a little bit about the Black Tomlinson side of things today? I mean, obviously you alluded to, you know, one of the biggest NFL player, I should say, but usually that's the exceptions. But you know, talk about that, of course. But like where are we today with the?
Sure. I mean, like LaDainian Tomlinson, you know, he is retired now from American football, but he is a commentator on the NFL TV network. Sweet. He made $60 million off of his NFL contract alone, and that doesn't count the tens of millions that he made from Nike, because he was the face of Nike for 5 years.
Oh, good for him.
You know, And that is the success story. He bought his mom a house. He bought his mom a Bentley.
Wow.
His mom's very happy.
Yes, of course.
But, while he was playing football, his father became addicted to opioids.
Oh, goodness.
Was injured. He was a builder, and he was injured on a job site, broke his back. And so the doctors prescribed him opioid drugs, OxyContin, and he became addicted to the OxyContin, and sold everything he owned and was basically living in a shack and barely taking care of himself. And he refused to allow LaDainian to take him to rehab. And LaDainian was trying to save him when he was in a car accident and died.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Wow.
And that is one of the great tragedies for LaDainian, is that he had all the money and all the fame, but he couldn't help his father. His father was out of reach because of this drug addiction, which really wasn't even his fault. So, he's got a cousin named Coco who is a nice young woman. And while her son was playing high school football, she had to work as a guard in a prison.
Oh, goodness. Okay.
And she hated it. She just hated working in the prison. But it's what she needed to do to support her son, who went on to become a football star like his uncle.
Oh, good for him.
Not as big a star, but he got a college scholarship.
Okay, so he's still in college now, or?
No, he's graduated. I've lost track what happened to the son, but there's also Stephen Tomlinson, who lives in Austin, not far from where I live, and he went to prison. He was an armed robber. Did 10 years, got out, became a used car salesman, and eventually started his own business in construction. And now he's making good money in construction, but he's also making good money as a part-time rapper.
Oh, wow.
Really? Versatile.
Multi-talented, my goodness. It's these are the lives, like any other lives, and this is the mistake that too many white people in America make, is they somehow think that the color of your skin somehow fundamentally decides what your personality and your future and how you're going to behave, and the truth is that Uncle Gia and I could have more in common genetically than me and another white person. That's how little your genes, how few of your genes make up the color of your skin and your physical appearance. It's actually quite tiny. And yet we assign our physical appearance so much importance when genetically it means nothing.
Chris, we have a few more minutes left here, but we hate to let you go so quickly without having you comment on, what you see outside the U.S. in terms of, sort of non-American brand of racism. What's out there? We sometimes, all three of us have U.S. backgrounds, so we think of it as somewhat, not uniquely American, but is part of our history. So you have had the chance to travel extensively outside the U.S. in Africa and other places. Share with us your thoughts about possibly the kind of racism or different brand of racism you see outside the U.S.
Sure. I was a foreign correspondent for the Associated Press. I've covered 9 wars over 14 years. And almost every one of them had an ethnic component to it, some form of bigotry. And so I tend to talk more about bigotry than I do racism, because, human beings divide themselves up. We create an us and them, and that can be based on anything. I remember being in Mogadishu covering the clan fighting in Somalia. And Somalia is one of the most homogenous countries on the planet. There's almost no difference in appearance. There's no difference in language. There's no difference in religion. And they divide themselves up not by subclan, but by sub-subclan, which means that your subclan basically depends on who your cousins are. It's based on your cousin group.
Right.
And they have deep, horrible bigotry and hatred, depending on which sub-subclan you're a member of. And certain sub-subclans are considered superior and others are inferior, and it's almost a caste system. And so, in America, we made it easy. It's all about the color of your skin.
Right.
You go to Rwanda, or you go to Sudan, or you go to Somalia, or you go to Afghanistan even, or Iraq. They're still dividing themselves up, and they're still hating each other just as much. They're just finding different ways to do it. And, and the thing is, we have to be taught that hatred. It does not come naturally. It's a construction of society where we have to be taught who is us and who is them. Who must we hate? Who must we love? And if we just think about it a little bit, all this can be overcome.
Right. Well, on that note, really appreciate Chris sharing this very personal story, and I think this is obviously an issue that we're all dealing with on a daily basis throughout the world. But I very much appreciate Chris ending this on the hopeful note that knowing what it is, and here are the things we can do, and I suppose it's part of the human condition that we continue to strive to make the world a better place. So anyway, again, thank you so very much for Chris for coming to our show, and I hope we can get Chris back again, because he clearly has many good stories. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
哇，真的非常感谢 Chris 跟我们分享他家族的故事，就是我觉得不管是电影还是什么，这个就是很容易把这个故事讲的，不管是就是很容易变成讲一边啦，就是有很明显的有好人有坏人，可是要很诚恳的面对他自己的这个祖先这个做的事情，那有好也有坏，这真的是一个很辛苦的事情，
真的很不容易耶。要是我的话，可能就说好啦，反正就各自过各自的生活，然后我相信大家都过得很好。
是，就是 happy ending 这样子。是，而且我觉得他有讲嘛，就是这种，因为种族在不要说是美国而已啦，全世界都是有它的复杂性。那而且它又是以一个那个黑奴的拥有者的后代的角度来做这件事情，我完全可以了解这个黑人那一边的人说，你谁啊？我为什么要信任你？你的祖先已经搞我搞了几代了，到现在我凭什么要跟你讲任何事情？是，这一点我真的是非常佩服他。
真的，这其实这整件事情，就是说种族的这个关系，在美国真的是很复杂。就是说没有错，就是说英国人在的时候，那个美国建国之前，它就是一个完整的制度，然后重点是建国的时候，他也就把这个制度合法纳进来他这个国家 就是诞生的时候的制度，所以这就是很复杂很复杂，
而且还为了这个大打一次
那又是对，那又是之后的事情，就是我就说讲1776年的时候，那大家就是因为这件事情就差点那个谈不拢嘛，就是大家就妥协，然后就大家都别忘记，就是说你知道一个黑奴就是等于3/5的白人，从一个数学的角度，这不是我讲的，是宪法讲的 ，OK？
投票的时候，投票的时候，
对，那个时候黑人是不能投票，但是就是那个可以算在总那个叫什么这个
投票数里面，
对，投票数里面，在那什么州electoral college 啦 ，anyway， 所以反正就是很复杂，所以这事情随着时间好像也没有变得更没有复杂的，我们现在还在经历过这个复杂的过程嘛，应该这样讲。对
呀，那其实就说这件事情，当然一方面因为我跟 Chris 很熟的朋友，那也知道他有这本书，就觉得我个人觉得很有趣。那其实我觉得从至少特别对台湾或是华人听众角度，常常会有朋友问我说，美国为什么每3个月还是每1年就会有一个重大的这种种族上的暴动啊？这个他们到底在干嘛？这样子，那第一个我完全了解，就是说从外面的角度说，为什么要搞那么复杂？可是话又说回来，这件事情真的那么复杂？这件事情已经纠缠了数百年，现在还在纠缠。那我觉得就是说透过 Chris 的这个故事，希望大家有一点点感觉，说这件事情不是一句话就能解决的，不是说我就给你一些钱还是怎么样？这个是这种几代的你的祖父对我的这个曾祖父怎么样，我的神又跟你又怎么样这样子。
就回到台湾的现实说，不是一个可以国赔就解决的事情。
对，
就因为有时候把它弄成国赔，又产生另外一个问题，就是说都给你钱了还要怎样？这种态度有时候也会就是有点二次伤害啦，所以这真的是一个很复杂，就是有点大家真的要透过很多种不一样的方式，就是把这个历史大家好好的再梳理一次，然后就是历史有时候是真的是很多面向的，也没有不一定是谁对谁错，但是要弄到一个大家能够找到一个和平相处的方式继续走下去啊，要不然怎么办？
而且我说实话啦，就是说听 Chris 这么讲的时候，我有一个不能说小感触，我觉得是一个对我个人很大的感触，就是说其实他在讲这件事情当然是非常美国的历史，可是其实在台湾大家也都有非常类似的经验，不管是台湾对于日本政府的看法，或者是这个国民政府进来，例如说有228事件这件事情，就是说人家300年到今天还是吵成这样子，所以我不是讲对或错了，就说将心比心，很多人对于日本政府或者228还是有那么深刻的感觉，其实是同样的道理。那不过话又说回来，就是我觉得至少在 Chris 的这个例子里面，我也很高兴，或是当然第一个就是觉得我这朋友太厉害了，另外一个是说，我觉得这个是经过历史的沉淀，大家对于这个历史真正面目很多不同面向的反省，这个是不是我们应该走的路，而不是讨论国赔。
但是国赔是最容易量化的东西啊，大家喜欢讨论国赔啊，对啊，
是，可是那这关就过不了，
我也同意，这我也同意，
对，所以我觉得就是很多历史上，我其实我自己念过历史系的课，我没有历史学位可是历史上有一句话很有名，就是它本来是英文啦，那个 history is not even the past，它的意思就是说，历史虽然发生，可是历史对于现在跟未来的影响还是非常大。你不是说1000年前发生的事情跟现在没关系，就是有关系。
不是说过了就过了，其实它还是在一直持续的，它的影响一直在发酵。 确实是
呀，所以我觉得这个也希望大家听完这 Chris 故事，大家也想想看，那个你昨天做什么坏事，尽量跟他去道歉，就是这样子。
OK，
好，那我们今天
打电话给老婆。
是，那我们那个接下来下个礼拜的，我们就讲一个蛮轻松的话题，我们又回到跟年轻人的对话，是孰在想知道。那我们在讨论什么呢？就是最近因为疫情啦等等关系，大家都在忙什么事？那跟大家报告一下，大署长非常努力的在做生物实验，所以请期待。OK， 好，那今天就到这边了，谢谢，拜拜，
拜拜。
谢谢大家收听本集的谢伯伯时间。在本集节目结束前，要来好好感谢我们最棒的幕后团队，我是 Ariel， 还有 Oliver、Hannah， 还有 Lalisa， 以及门面担当大叔嗓、大叔甲。如果你喜欢我们的节目，别忘了按下订阅和5颗星的评论哦。另外，也祝大家在疫情期间都能平安健康。那我们就下集见，拜拜。